Before we get into today's video, some regulatory compliance. My name is Andrew Alexander. I am Head of Investments for Three Counties, an independent financial advisor based in County Durham, England. This video is for anyone who has an interest in investing and investment markets, both retail clients with no experience of investing through to industry professionals who invest for themselves and their clients. As independent financial advisors and wealth managers, there is no commercial relationship between ourselves and today's guest. The purpose of this video is educational, and in no way should any of the content be construed as advice, nor is it an enticement to invest. Past performance is not a guide to future performance, nor a reliable indicator of future results or performance. The value of investments may go down as well as up and is not guaranteed. Therefore, investors may not get back the amount originally invested. And now, onto the video. Welcome everyone to another of our weekly investment manager videos, and many thanks once again for tuning in. This is video number 3 in our end of 2021 market roundup and outlook into the new year. And today we venture into the land of the rising sun. If you didn't know what I mean by that, it's Japan. The region is certainly gaining more attention as global investors are looking to diversify. But is this warranted, and where are the best opportunities in Japan? Now, to give us his view on 21 and an outlook into the coming year, I'm delighted once again to bring back to the channel Carl Vine, manager of both the M&G Japan and Japan Smaller Companies Fund. So someone who is rather uniquely positioned to give a whole of market view on Japan. But first, before we get into content, as ever, if you haven't subscribed already, it would be wonderful if you could. It really does help us in delivering all of this financial planning and investment management content every single week. So, begging out of the way, as usual, onto the content. Carl, many thanks for coming onto the channel once again. Kicking things off, let's have a look at 21. How has the Japanese market performed this year?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure. So Japan in 2021, I guess I think about it in two different ways. One, in terms of what's the equity market delivered, in terms of returns, but then secondly, what's been delivered in terms of earnings. So I'll just comment briefly on both. So in terms of returns, the market or topics, the broader index is up about 15.5%, including dividends year to date. So a solid performance, particularly given that last year the market was up just less than 10%, and then the year before 16%. So the market really continues to grind away what I believe are really quite decent returns. That said, compared to some other markets, Japan is lagging. So the S&P, as we know, is powered on again this year, up another 25%, I think, in counting. Some of the European markets have got a 20 handle on them. So I think Japan hasn't kept pace with that, but I think at 15.5%, it's definitely a solid return. And from an Eastern Hemisphere perspective, definitely stands out. China and Hong Kong obviously have been, relatively pretty weak this year. So I think if I think about a Japanese return of 15.5%, year to date versus the risk of ownership, and don't forget we've got really strong balance sheets in Japan, which offers a lot of downside protection. I think it's just fine. Now, in terms of this idea of Japan grinding out decent returns, actually, I just want to mention that if we look back in the last 5 and 10 years, Japan's been the second best performing of the major equity markets globally, after in fact the US. So since Abe arrived, 10 years ago and kicked off this reform agenda that we talk about a lot, actually Japanese equities have done really well. They've been grinding away for a decade at a 14% compound return. Again, versus the risk of ownership, I think it's pretty solid. So I'd say I'm happy with the market performance this year. It's done well. More importantly, it's thrown up a lot of individual stock ideas, which we've been able to benefit from, but we'll come back to that a bit later on maybe. In terms of the earnings, I think this is really interesting actually. If we are going to review 2021, whatever the index has returned, companies themselves have continued to improve their earnings structure. So I was just checking recently, looking at I just took the Topics 150 benchmark as an example, and I just looked at how earnings have been evolving. And here we are this year, despite all of this disruption linked to COVID and logistics and semiconductor shortages. And actually, it looks as though this year, Japanese corporates will set a new record high in terms of corporate profits, roughly 10% ahead of the pre-COVID peak. I think this is impressive, to be honest with you. Actually, it would be up 15% if we took out railways and airlines. So corporate earnings in Japan have been pretty resilient, frankly, in the face of these rolling series of calamities. And that's broad spread. It's not just in high growth tech sectors. That growth is coming across all sectors in Japan. So I think the earnings this year are doing really well. And again, if I was to take a step back, the same as I did with the kind of returns picture, actually in the last decade, Japanese earnings have been on fire. They've grown faster than US corporate earnings, which is hard to believe but true. So I think we've seen some pretty amazing earnings performance structurally in the last decade, and that continues on this year. So I think this story of self-improvement, this story of reform, is not just a story. You can actually see it in the near term, and now, if you consider 10 years as long term, you can see it in the long term. So I think that's quite a positive development. Incidentally, Japanese operating margins are still half of that in the US. So I think there's a long way for this to run.
Absolutely, and I think as we sit here, maybe the backdrop of current market conditions, where we've got to look and say, well, Japan's only done 15.5% over the last 12 months, is I don't know whether that says something about the markets as a whole or not, but anyway, I
Very good
think
point.
it smacks me as a little bit weird, but the fundamentals that you're pointing to and the record breaking stats that you bring to the table, it seems positive. So that was 21. How are you looking? What's your outlook for 22?
Yeah, well, this is where I have to be very cautious. I'm really cautious about getting drawn into making predictions about the future. It normally ends with humiliation. Actually, normally within a short period of time, as history comes along to prove us all completely wrong. And that a big part of our process is to not put too much store in our ability to predict the future. We spend most of our time pricing risk. But one thing I will hang my hat on as a ludicrous forecast, I suppose, is that the pace of corporate reform in Japan, I think, in 2022 is going to accelerate. I feel really confident about that. So if we look at the number of corporate restructuring announcements filed with the stock exchange this year in Japan, is up about 20% or so year on year. So another record high. It's up about 4x in the last decade. And I feel that there's a lot more of that to come. So I do feel pretty confident in saying that whatever happens to the global economy next year, whatever happens to headline equity returns, there's this extra bit of alpha in Japan that I think is going to come from this ongoing but accelerating reform. So 400 companies, I think, by the time this fiscal year is done, there'll be 400 companies that will have filed official restructuring announcements. This includes MBOs or spin-offs or divisional restructurings. That's 400. So I think, roughly speaking, 20% of the listed sector is formally restructuring itself. And then, of course, you've got the informal restructurings that are going on every day. And so, as I say, I think that probably the biggest no-brainer for me in terms of predictions is that for 2022 is that there's going to continue to be a lot of individual stock-specific source of investment opportunity in Japan as this restructuring continues.
And beautifully segueing into how you're looking at those those opportunities for your own portfolios, like I said, the M&G Japan and the Japan Smaller Companies Funds. Are there any recent changes? Have you brought many things in? Is it just sticking to what you go? Has there been much change?
Yeah, so I think there's been probably an average level of change in the last quarter. We continue to find interesting stock-specific ideas. So I'd say no kind of revolutionary change, but as you know, we've been fortunate this year that our funds have performed pretty well, and that's given us the opportunity to take some profits on some positions that have really done very well indeed. And so there's definitely opportunity for reinvestment, and we're finding no lack of opportunity with which to redeploy those funds. The returns this year and last year have been overwhelmingly stock specific in their nature.
Okay.
We're very much a bottom up stock picking oriented fund. That's exactly how our process is designed. So we continue to focus on those stock specific opportunities. And I think, as I look at what new positions we've added in the last quarter, I continue to be excited about that opportunity set. We are finding, again, in large caps, mid caps, and small caps,
Okay.
names where we see very, very significant upside on a 1 or 2 year view. So we're excited about that. I do think that whilst it's not exclusively our focus, we do spend a lot of time on companies where we feel our abilities to engage constructively with management can help realize value and release value. And there's a couple of names we've added to the portfolio in the last quarter where I think I'm pretty excited about our opportunity to help the company become a better version of itself.
Yeah.
And so that, again, continues to be an area of focus for us in Japan.
And certainly, just to finish, from speaking to you, from talking to the team, from understanding, how you guys invest, that interaction with companies is a real key element of what I see your proposition is. And that combined with the opportunities that are obviously there in Japan, it does look like we could have a really positive outlook to 22. But who knows? Like you say, never make predictions because you'll always get them wrong. But anyway, as ever, Carl, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You stay safe, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Take care.